Well, welcome to FinTech Impact. I'm your host, Jason Pereira. Today on the show, I have David Weinstein, CEO and co-founder of KayOs. KayOs is a business that helps other businesses structure their data and operations to be AI native and to rethink how they're going to approach the problems they have and build the businesses they're building. And with that, here's my interview with David. David, thanks for taking the time today.
Thanks so much, Jason. Pleasure to be here.
So, David Weinstein of KayOs, tell us about KayOs.
Yeah, so as Jason mentioned, Chaos is essentially we're building an AI native operating system for organizations to take full advantage and basically transform themselves to be AI native in how they go about their business operations day to day. We work closely with companies, helping them structure all of their unstructured data as well as their structured data, organize it in a contextual way that can allow the latest and best AI models and agents and coding agents to take full advantage of their information to empower the companies that we work with.
Excellent. All right. So let's talk about the origin of the company.
The company itself, yeah, we founded the company late last year, so just 1 year.
Because I'm just saying, because we're recording this right around the time, like we are on like, was it the 2 year anniversary? Like when is that? It's very shortly, right? Of ChatGPT. So
Yeah,
yes, no surprise that it hasn't, it's not that old.
totally. I mean, so the company itself and the use of AI, to your point, we're just 1 year old, still very young as a company. The origin story, though, me and my co-founder, we've been working together now for about 6 years. We met in 2019 at a startup, and then we became close friends, but also close business partners. We then spent most of COVID, so the 2020s, consulting and advising for a number of startups, often within this data-based problem, which was companies, startups, organizations, etc., have so much data, so much information, so much knowledge that they don't know how to access effectively. They know they have the data, but they don't know how to actually use it to make better decisions more effectively. And so me and my co-founder, Yad, we basically partnered up to work with these companies where Yad, as the genius technical side, would help these companies wrangle all of their messy data, their unstructured information, etc., and structure it into a clean data lake, for lack of a better word. And then I would take that structured data and build interfaces and tools and models on top of it to allow operators to better access their data and better make decisions with that data.
Yeah. So, I mean, what you're identifying as a problem has existed for a very long time. I mean, I even have a prof back in my university days who wrote a seminal paper on knowledge management and how the need for knowledge management was going to basically become a major need for companies across the board. He even, like, he went so far as to philosophize that they were going to build knowledge management officers that basically handled all this. Now, of course,
Yeah.
that didn't come to being largely because, I'd say incentives, right? As long as things are working, then no one stops to think about necessarily about how to make it work 1% better or whatever else it is. And they assume things are getting written down. No one takes ownership of that, right? And there's no line item of revenue related to the ownership of knowledge. And that's
Yeah.
basically it. So this is a problem that has basically been seen forever in business. People wrote software 20 years ago, and now someone's excited to service it, and that those someones have no idea the purpose, the confines, the reasoning ends up being Chesterton's fence. So basically, the problem's long-lived, but the incentive has changed, right? Like the innovation of Gen AI has now created a potential incentive regarding efficiency that and other benefits that basically did not exist before. So now everybody's sitting there going like, crap, we should have done this sooner. So
Yeah.
like talk to me about what companies need to find foundationally do with their data in order to set themselves up in order to actually leverage it appropriately.
Yeah, and it's a great question and great overview of the history. What comes to mind is with Gen AI specifically, as you were talking about, and we all know this from talking to ChatGPT or whatever it is that we do personally, these models are only as good as the data and the context that goes into them. And we all know we have past conversations, past information, past knowledge that we've seen or that we've talked about or that we've generated. We want that information now to be infused within the models that we use today. The issue, to your point, is that the vast majority of people haven't really organized their knowledge, organized their data in a way that's actually useful for these models to utilize that data as context. And so that's often where we come into these companies that we work with. They have so much tacit knowledge that is not explicitly written down or explicitly organized in any useful way, but their IP, their value, their basically, yeah, their value as an organization is that tacit knowledge. And so what we often do is we work with these individuals, these companies, And it begins with conversation, like understanding how they view the world, their subjectivity, their ontology, even. And so we take like an ontological lens to this entire problem, which is how do you, as a company or as an individual, make decisions? What is it you look for and look at? And how do you go through the actual, like analytical, but also like the interpretive lens of going from information to decision making? We really want to map all of that out. And so what we end up getting to is basically we call it like an ontology graph or a context graph of the organization itself, how the organization functions. So that could be as simple as their business model, which is often can be extremely simple, but then we go into depth, understanding each part of that model and where all that information lives that fuels each part of that model. And that culminates in basically a graph that we set up, and then we add all of the data and knowledge into the components of that graph for the models and the agents to utilize. And we can go into detail there, but that's sort of a super high level vision of what we end up getting to, which is that context graph as our core offering to these companies.
Okay, so this knowledge is coming to you in a number of ways, right? It's coming to you in PDFs, PowerPoints, internal websites, other documents. Like, what are you doing to standardize this stuff in order to be able to action it?
Yeah, and so that's sort of where the past couple of years with AI models, especially language models and coding agents, really come into the picture. Because me and my co-founder did parts of this in a more manual way historically without language models. And we would do it manually. We would manually structure the unstructured data into schemas. But now what we can do with language models is supercharge the work that we do to go from unstructured to structured. And so what you were saying with the types of unstructured information would be things like PDFs are a great example, like legal contracts, spreadsheets, models, documents, just text, like books. It can be podcasts even or videos and the transcripts that are generated from that. All of that is the unstructured corpus of information that we start to play with. So that's like the raw chaos, hence the name of our company as KayOs. That's like the chaos that we operate in is that unstructured mass amount of information. And then, so that's phase one. Phase two, I would say, is really the opposite extreme, which is, again, going back to the graph, the model. How do they, as a company, like how can we represent that entire organization in a model? Basically, nodes and edges, so nodes and relationships. And then that's sort of the two edges of this spectrum, the chaos and then the perfect order. And then the magic of the coding agents that we use and the pipelines that we built and just our own unique perspective is going from the chaos to the order, which is the actual structuring and the schematizing of that
Mhm.
data into that graph. And eventually it goes into basically just nothing but a knowledge graph or a database
Yeah.
of, again, nodes and edges. Yeah.
Yeah, the end result is a database. Talk to me about what it takes to do that from like, where do you even start? How do you even put your hands around this problem of all the data in an organization? Because I think to myself about how big even my Google Drive is, and it must be like monstrous. How do you even get started in this journey? What attack vector do you take? Where do you go?
Yeah, so we start simple and expand out in terms of complexity. So let's take a very simple example. Okay, so we work with an e-commerce company. They sell products both online, but also now in retail stores. The products that they sell, there's a whole supply chain associated with it, and then they market to customers via typical online platforms, Facebook, Google, TikTok, etc. So at the highest possible level, that's their business model. They purchase ingredients, they have a supplier warehouse that builds the products, they advertise to customers, and then they sell both online and in physical stores. So we start modeling that out in a very, very simple graph, but across that entire, basically those 5, 6 steps. Then for each of those steps, we then seek to find all of the information related to those steps and we find it however we can. Some of it's very structured and easy, such as online sales data, but some of it is more complex, such as supply chain health. So that can be invoices, emails, PDFs, spreadsheets, and CSVs. What we then do is we take that information and we think of a really powerful schema that can represent the intent behind what we want it to do, which is health of supply. And so we then basically run the raw data through pipelines that extracts out semantically what is relevant to how a human would interpret that as understanding health in a given week or month or whatever the time period is. And so a lot of it is embedding that context into vectors that relate to qualitative assessment of health. And the key thing there is embeddings that go to quality. So it's not fully a quantitative exercise, it's a qualitative interpretation of this information within the qualitative assessment of health which then can flow into the model itself to give you at least a relative range of how
A
good or bad things
cross-sectional look
are.
at it, right? So, I mean, on some level, you're talking about pairing the qualitative stuff with doing something to the effect of being able to tag it, right? Like being able to categorize, like throw tags on, like just be able to say to the machine, this is where you look for this type of thing, right? As opposed to looking at the total corpus of the entire material and then being able to pair that with the entire qualitative side, quantitative side, right? Like now that we have this piece, how do you do it on the math? Like, how do you actually do the calculations necessary, whatever else it is? And not just from the standpoint of the thing you're being asked to, but like the probabilistic, like, what are the odds? The question that gets asked of the AI, what is the probability that that's going to reflect or point to this answer?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So maybe let me say it a slightly different way as well. Like if I ask you to just to go back to the supply chain health example as a
Yeah.
very just general thing. If I ask you, say you're the head of operations in this company, your job is to be on top of supply chain every day. I'm the CEO. I go to you and say, like, how is the supply chain this week? Or what is going on with supply? You as a human, the way you would map that in your mind is, okay, like I know roughly where to search within my universe to find information. I can find the relevant documents, spreadsheets, whatever it is. You can compile that into your own mind or into your computer, whatever it is. And then you start to do analytical analysis on top of that. And then you get to a summary that you can then email back to me with the answer. The key thing there is searching the infinite space and narrowing that infinity down to like a finite search result, and then finding the things and then doing the analytical part on top and then summarizing that into an output. That process is what we are training our agents to do. So we tag all the information based on semantic representation. So what the thing is, and that's all using vector embeddings. So it's in a multidimensional vector space. And so when I ask an agent in my what we call the command center for this example would be what happened last week in terms of supply. It would identify keywords there in the multidimensional space, such as supply and last week. It would then know exactly where to look within my corpus. So it would find all of the supply related information from the past 7 days. It would then take that into its context window, and then I have an analytical agent that will then analyze that information, and then it would analyze it in a way given where I have other context saying what the business actually is and what the business looks for and what's meaningful. It would then analyze that data in context to the business meaning that we have identified for it, and all that gets compiled then into a summary answer given back to me. All that happens in 30 seconds. And then it's not just that it gives you the answer and that's the answer. It opens up like a dialectic conversation where then I
Yeah,
can ask follow-up questions, I can inquire more. And so it's not giving me the answer as in gospel, it's giving me tools to explore more effectively within this massive space.
fair enough. So we talked about the data, we talked about some of the execution. Let's go back to the kind of like implementation of the model layer and talk about when you start to bring that on board, right? There's different models out there. There's different use cases for them. So talk to me about the selection of what tools you're going to use and bring to bear once you have the data in place.
The way we tend to operate, we have a few philosophical things that we hold true. When we work with a company, we create private servers for them. So we don't want this to go back into like training centralized models. We want this to be your data, your information, your context, offline, everything's secure. No one can access it but you and us. So we secure all of your data, all of your context in a private server that the customer, has full control over. And then we utilize open source models that live within the server privately. And so that's just our approach to doing this. We want to keep things off open source, private, etc. As for which models specifically we use depends on the specific thing that we need done. So different embedding models, like search retrieval models, there's longer term reasoning models. We use coding agents extensively to build out pipelines and interfaces. And so we use a whole suite of models for different purposes. But the goal in many ways for us is flexibility. I think no one really knows how this whole AI space is going to evolve. But we do know, or we believe that no matter how the models and the agents and things like that evolve, context, like your personal context, your company's context is going to be, I would say, increasingly valuable, not less valuable over time. So as long as we can secure your data and context for you, we want to be able to leverage any and all models that come to be. And without being so opinionated on a certain type, we want it to be like anti-fragile to the AI models coming out.
Okay. So you have that aspect of it. Let's talk about the fine tuning of it, right? Basically, These are just giant probability engines, right? You've fed it a bunch of material. It is discerning what people are talking about, trying to connect the dots, and it's showing, serving up the highest probability, answer based on what it's been taught. But especially early on, there are going to be some misfires. How do you basically go about increasing its hit rate?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's a few different angles there that I can go after. The way we typically work, like I said, is we set up the data infrastructure for a company, and then we build interfaces on top and a bunch of agents that can be your thought partner, or it could do analysis, or it could take action on your behalf, etc. In terms of the data pipelines aspect of what we do, we need 100% deterministic workflows. If we're piping in data every day from, let's say, Shopify for the e-commerce company, we need it to be literally perfect every day. And so we have used Claude Code and other coding agents to build the pipelines, but instead of letting the agents do it all on their own, we provide scaffolding, which is basically saying we provide a bunch of examples and markdown files and rules on how to build these things. So when we now build data pipelines for different customers, it's 100% perfect because we have all the scaffolding in place to make sure that the final output is exactly what it needs to be. So that's one piece that's we make sure it's fully deterministic. In terms of, and similar with building interfaces, we want that to be the exact right interface that we want to build. When it comes to agents that are more probabilistic, as in there's more uncertainty, or it's more stochastic, the scaffolding principle is that we have defined a lot of metrics for every customer that we work with. We define what matters, what doesn't matter, what to look for, what not to look for, how things are defined, etc. And so we have all these rules and these examples that scaffold the model. And when the model gives you an answer, it is constantly citing sources and providing you the actual location of the information that we are using for that particular answer. So all of the citations are always there. We also do a lot of QA, or we have a whole section of the product for QA, which is that everything that comes in gets saved and recorded, and you can always go back and check and assess and make sure that it was the right information.
Now, let's take a step back. So when it's not the right information, what's the correcting mechanism that can be undertaken?
Yeah, so every piece of feedback that is every bit of feedback someone provides goes into the system and it becomes a recursive loop.
It now knows that, or you're directing in the right
Yeah.
direction, and it learns from itself.
So there's a whole feedback log within our system for that exact reason. So it's always finding those mistakes and errors and it corrects them.
So, okay. So we talked about the foundational layers of data and the difficulty of ingesting that and what you have to do that. We talked about the selection of tools over top of it. We talked about the training aspects of it. Talk about the human implementation, right? How do you go about getting organizations to properly use this? Because, hey, I mean, like to technology people, sometimes it sounds ridiculous, but people will legitimately freeze at a Google box and not know what to type, right? So how do you get people to actually say, I'm going to change my routine, my workflow to actually implement and do the thing that basically these people are telling me that I can do?
Yeah. So the way we go about it is we're not really trying to change behavior from the end user, like the operator, the human team. We have a background, like I mentioned earlier, of like essentially business intelligence is sort of our background. As in, we used to build a bunch of dashboards, reports, etc., things like that that are more standard in, especially in tech companies. Everyone has dashboards. Our interfaces look like that ultimately. They look like the same thing you saw 10 years ago in Tableau in many ways. As in, you log into KayOs if you're at a company that uses KayOs, and you'll see similar dashboards, similar interfaces, similar metrics. The difference, though, is that whenever you have a question, instead of having to go like Slack someone the question or go find someone to ask them, you can just ask the agents that are around that dashboard, and it can provide you the context behind that data point, that chart, that whatever it is. And it can do analysis on your behalf. So if you're like, oh, there's an interesting spike in sales this past week, what happened? 10 years ago, you'd have to go to your business analyst. Right now, you can go to the agent in the interface and it'll do the full analysis for you on your behalf.
Yeah,
And so
and
it
that's a good
becomes,
example of an agent. But essentially, what we're doing with that is you're taking the context of the question, drawing upon the specific resources, having the reference frame for how that information is laid out, and then pulling that into a final report. That is a perfect example of an agent because you're taking data. There has to be some form of discretion. There's some heavy lifting involved there, and you put all three of those together. That's where these things excel when trained properly.
and so even before I started doing this as a consultant 5 years ago, I've been a business analyst for 10 years before that. I would handle that question all the time from the CEO or whomever, being like, what happened last week? I would go through the same process every time, different data, different context, but the same pattern of, okay, I'll take the data, I'll pull it in, I'll do some makeshift analysis, I would do some trend analysis. I would try to find more information from other teams if anything changed. I would try to correlate the data to other things, etc. After a few years of doing that, it's the same pattern. What we now have these agents doing is we train the agents to do those patterns. So now the interesting part is not the pattern and the computation, it's actually the questions you ask. And the feedback loop is so much faster. So now you're an operator or CEO, you see this data. Now, instead of having to wait a day to find out the answer or a week, you can just ask a question and get the answer within 30 seconds, which then allows you to ask follow-up questions and stay in flow and go deeper and deeper and deeper. This empowers the business side to be the ones that are actually asking the questions and going deeper, as opposed to having to outsource that to an analytical team that may not have the actual full context of the business leader.
All right, so you got that. Talk to me about, besides just data, data withdrawal, or sorry, or what's a good term for it, requesting, or for lack of a better term, are you basically seeing this enable now? This is the early stage of it all. Like, what other interesting, unique use cases have you seen with agents besides just, doing some basic calculations and putting together reports?
Yeah, so I'd say two come to mind immediately. One is actually the same e-commerce company that we just rolled out, which is basically it's not just like understanding what's happening with your data, it's also like what do you want to do next. And so for this company, for example, they were a subscription business, so people subscribe to order the same product every month. The subscription has options to pause your subscription. We now built out an agent that you can customize it to whatever you want it to do. But right now, for example, it could be those that have paused for more than 60 days. It's finding those that were active in the past and then paused for 60 days. So the agent gets that customer list and then it personalizes an email to each of the individuals based on their actual order history and some other stuff that we can add to the email. It'll create personalized emails for each of those customers and then send out the email. And then it can track open rate and conversion rate. So something that a human or a SaaS product would do is now just built directly into the system itself. So it makes it super easy for head of growth to just click a button and do that whole workflow on top of their data lake. So that's more of an action-oriented agent. Another example is a bit more on the understanding business health type stuff, but I think it's pretty cool. We work with another company, and their main ask for us when we first came in was they want to better understand share of voice of their brand amongst competitors online, on the internet, on Twitter, essentially. And so what we did is we identified a bunch of keywords that they care about, a bunch of competitors that they care about, categorize all of that a bit. And then we basically built pipelines that scrape Twitter every day. So we have thousands and thousands, I think probably up to like 1 million plus tweets now in their database, all tagged by keyword, by competitor, by sentiment, things like that. And so we can now calculate using our agents share of voice dynamically over time by keyword and by different cuts, which is super cool to see it. And then we also now have an interface for their marketing team to be able to basically talk to the system, the agent, and understand the changing landscape. So they can ask all these questions being like, what happened last week, which is a basic question, but then what did competitor X say about this topic? Or how are we being perceived relative to company Y on topic X? And you can ask these very human type questions and get very good answers because all the data is already there, tagged and structured. Then the agent is just basically searching and scouring through this data set to answer your questions very efficiently. And it's super cool way just to see what's happening like in the public sphere for the company.
And yeah, talk about, it's a great little public sentiment analysis tool that you could potentially use that works out quite well there. Before we end the podcast, there's a couple of questions I'd like to ask everybody to end on a positive note. The first one is basically, if you had one wish for something you could change in your company or the industry as a whole, what would it be?
Oh, good. That's a great question. In the industry as a whole, I would say the industry as a whole, the AI industry is obsessed with thinking that computation alone is what matters. As in, get more data, more information, more compute power, and we will solve all of humanity's problems. I think that is not remotely the case. I
It's an
think
engineer's solution to everything, and
it's an
I've been
engineer
waiting for
solution
them
to
to put
everything.
the number of industries have been waiting for them to put out of business permanently for the last 30 years is getting a little bit hilarious.
Exactly. So I guess the wish there would be I wish more people in AI actually start to understand more about the human side of things and take an appreciation for what makes us uniquely human and understand values, ethics, aesthetics, beauty, all those types of things, and start to imbue this technology with more of that and not just think it's all about engineering because it honestly is not. And that's going to be a terrible feature if the more we think that it is.
I could go on for hours about this topic. Anyway,
Yeah.
it's also a degree of hubris, right? It's this
Yeah.
entire like you think you looked at a problem from the outside and you think you understand it and you think you can solve it. And or you can just throw this magical finding machine at it and you think you're going to cover that when so much of the nuance of any organization or problem or situation is actually not documented properly. Good luck to you. Good luck to you. But
Yeah.
and this is why so many industries are persistent because frankly that technology is not necessarily to put them out of business. Anyway,
No. Yeah.
that diatribe aside, second question: what's been the biggest challenging in the company to where it is to date?
The biggest challenge for us to date, I would say in this space, in AI broadly, but it's probably not unique to AI, AI can do so much. It's really difficult to know what to actually do. And for us specifically, we have a handful of customers in different industries, and we tackle different verticals within each of these companies. It's very difficult to do so many different types of verticals in so many different types of industries. So the biggest challenge has been that like being spread so thin across all of that. And we're increasingly doing this as our company is really, at least for now, honing in on specific verticals and specific industries versus trying to do everything for everyone. The power of AI is you can, but the downfall is that's never a good path.
Yeah, so funny story. So the abundance problem, the infinity
Yeah,
problem, the
yeah,
problem that
yeah.
it can do anything, and that is the problem with the problem with anything can be anything and do anything is that no one knows where to start, right? And that is a big issue, and it's one that will destroy a company if they're not careful because if all you see is abundance, you basically will die of indigestion. And
Yeah,
funny enough, people are gonna hear that exact sentence when the next episode airs, episode 400, because I just finished saying it as I recorded it. All right, last question I have for you is what keeps you getting up in the morning to keep on fighting the good fight? That is what you're working on because running your own business is not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's two things. One is just this like childhood curiosity for this entire technology space. Like it's AI, I mean, this whole industry is, as much as I say it's too engineering heavy and as a downside, I mean, it's also extremely cool. Like people are building really, really powerful, amazing things that every day you go on Twitter and there's like 1,000 new amazing things that came out overnight. So that's just like purely curiosity driven joy of seeing that and building in it. And then the other one is probably a bit more, not to be too grandiose, but I think AI is extremely powerful and also could be extremely destructive. I think a lot of companies and people need to have a good AI strategy for their company or else they're going to get eaten alive. Either by AI that destroys their operations or things like, I don't know,
No, no, I'm
understanding.
with you. I
Yeah.
think the way, this is, people think that and they think of the, Terminator 2000 or putting them out of business kind of trope. But the reality is that if you don't do the things that makes your business efficient, sooner or later, you're going to suffer for it, right? You're going to have worse margins. It's going to be harder to compete. Imagine somebody who tries to operate in any industry without a computer right now. You're just not going to have the same efficiencies or the opportunities or the margins that someone who does. It's not saying that it's going to shut you down tomorrow. It's going to be a slow, painful burn that's going to basically reduce your enterprise value to God knows however little. And if you don't care and you just want to bleed your company to death, knock yourself out. But if you want something to be lasting or to grow or to maintain your value, it is a very real challenge. It's just business, man. That's just how business works.
And then on that point, AI will make your company very efficient if you use it. But I think there's a difference between efficiency for the pure sake of efficiency versus efficiency that enables you to be more creative on top. A lot of the AI tools that exist are like, we'll give you 1 million leads and we'll close everything and just hit a button and it's all gonna be perfect. Like I hate that.
You got to be
Versus what I think I'm trying to build is more of this. Yes, this AI is very powerful, but it's powerful when it's harnessed by you as the human team on top of it to ask questions and be curious. And so I want to sort of like instill that within organizations is that it's not magic. Like it's just really powerful. And it's only as powerful as you as the human sort of like orchestrator. And so I want to empower that side of teams.
excellent. So basically, you're absolutely right. And this has been a pleasure. And hopefully, anyone who wants to start or on how to start thinking about their data and their AI is going to enjoy this episode and potentially reach out to you. So thank you, David. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Jason, thank you so much, man.
Oh, one last anecdote before we go. The irony of saying that AI is going to solve all these problems. We're having this conversation on the day that AWS is suffering a major outage after, bragging online more than once about how their coders are spending only an hour coding and everything else is being done by AI now. Maybe if it was 2 hours, this wouldn't have happened. I don't know. But the point is that the irony. So with that, thank you for your time, David. Very much appreciated. And everybody's listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, take care.
This podcast was brought to you by Woodgate Financial, an award-winning financial planning firm catering to high net worth individuals and their families. To learn more, go to woodgate.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play, or find more episodes at jasonpereira.ca.